Since France has another revolution in 1848, it's not hard to imagine that somebody got upset with Louis Philippe. What was the source of that dissatisfaction? Mainly, it came from urban areas, urban dissatisfaction. If you remember during the lecture on the Industrial Revolution, there was an incredible population growth that started around 1800 and continued through the century. Many of those people who were born found themselves in urban environments, and they're not very hopeful. This is exacerbated by a depression, right? High unemployment, falling prices, bankruptcy in 1848. There are thousands of people living in cities who have no way to feed themselves or clothe themselves or house themselves. They have nothing to fall back on. They're in a city, and cities require a cash economy. There's no way for them to get cash in a depression. There's no public assistance. Churches aren't in a position to help. The urban dissatisfaction then manifests itself in banquets, where these assemblies reiterated, expressed the dissatisfaction with revolutionary rhetoric. Instead of listening to this dissatisfaction and accepting it as legitimate, Louis Philippe tried to ignore this or downplay it as just, oh, your normal grievances. That doesn't work well. And so what started out as a petition for the king to act turned into a radical revolution, where these urban mobs then sought the destruction of the monarchy. They wanted a republic. And so in 1848, they took to the streets, ran Louis Philippe off the throne, and established the Second Republic. Right? The First Republic was during the First Revolution, 1789, 1792. And one of the byproducts of that Second Republic then was the creation of national workshops. This was the idea of the socialist Louis Blanc. Blanc understood that part of the social anxiety, the popular unrest, was because of lack of jobs. That capitalists were not providing jobs, right? Capitalists invest at a risk in order to make a profit. Those businesses were failing. And so Louis Blanc said, well, we're going to create jobs. We're going to put people to work building roads and bridges. Things that help the public. This would be financed by the government, hired by the government. There's no need to wait for capitalists to hire people that are unemployed. The government has a responsibility to put people to work, right? Because for Louis Blanc, everyone had a right to work. Every able person that wanted to work ought to have a job. And if the private businesses wouldn't give them a job, the government had the responsibility to give them a job. Because without work, you get no salary. Without salary, you can't buy food, clothing, and shelter. So if the private economy is not going to work, the public economy ought to step in and intervene. This was incredibly popular. The Second Republic then introduced universal manhood suffrage, that all adult males should be able to vote. there was a push at this time for just simply universal suffrage, particularly among socialists. They believed women should also have a right to vote. But among men, that was not a very popular idea. Men wanted their own right to vote, but women, I'm not sure if we're willing to go that far. Right? That's radical. So they were able to get rid of property qualifications. They were the age goes down to 21, and basically all males have a right to vote in 1848, which then establishes this principle of the popular will, that the people create the government. And so the leaders of this revolutionary movement that declared the Second Republic called upon the voters to have a constitutional assembly. So the first vote taken in this Second Republic was to elect people to a constitutional or constituent assembly so they would sit down and write the Constitution. And so people ran for election based upon what they thought the new Constitution ought to look like. What should executive power look like? What should legislative power look like? What should judicial power look like? Well, here are the results of that election. So whose revolution is this? April 1848, 500 moderate Republicans. They were committed to the idea of a republic, but they thought of a republic as property owners, not popular sovereignty. There were 300 monarchists. Voters selected representatives who would go to write this Constitution, and in the Constitution, they were going to write a monarch into the Constitution. Only 80 seats went to radicals and or socialists. Right? It's the radicals and the socialists who want to look out for working people. So even with universal manhood suffrage, where every adult male in France is able to vote, you get a clear majority in favor of republic, that there ought to be a representative government. But there's still some holdouts, right? A sizable number of holdouts that want to keep a monarchy of some form or another. This attitude against democratic participation was solidified during the June days, where urban workers took to the streets again. And so the Constitution was written, and they're calling for a new election in 1848. And this time, 400 monarchists come back. There's this belief that only a strong man can bring about law and order. A monarch would take care of this mob violence. But also at the same time, 200 radicals were returned, because they were inspired by the mob violence. They were disheartened by the first election. So who lost? Who gets squeezed out? It's the people who want to compromise. Compromise, in the eyes of the far right and the far left, is seen as weak, So this makes it less likely for getting things done. And it opened the door for Louis Napoleon. Louis Napoleon was a Bonapartist. He ran on the name of his uncle. And for president, he got 5.5 million votes. That was enough to secure him the presidency of France. And immediately, he started concentrating on infrastructure. He built rural roads, improved rural roads. He built railroads. He built canals. There were two things with this, right? These are immediate job projects that Napoleon brings to local areas, and they improve commerce throughout the country. It connects rural parts of France into the more prosperous parts of France. He also introduced the Fallot laws. These laws opened the door to Roman Catholic religious orders in public schools, right? The schools would still be owned by the state. The schools would still be under state authority and state regulation, but Roman Catholic priests and nuns and brothers would then teach in public schools. Obviously, they're going to introduce public prayer. They're going to reintroduce Catholic ideas of preaching or Catholic ideas of theology, because he wants a strong moral education. And he blamed the popular violence on a lack of morality. And the only way to reintroduce that morality was to have religious leaders in public schools. Fearing a backlash, Napoleon then orchestrates a coup in 1851. He wasn't going to put himself to the will of the people. He just asserted that this is what the people want. I'm going to be in charge. He was not going to submit to a term limit. He called the assembly a bunch of squabbling lawyers. All they do is talk, talk, talk. I'm a man of action. I'm going to be a man of action. I'm going to be a strong man. And when he put this to a vote, the election comes back with 92%. Once again, universal mandate suffrage. They're watching what he does. And the men of France turn out to vote for 92% to eliminate their own republic. He then puts it to a vote another time and declares a second empire. Right? The first empire is Napoleon, and he's Louis Napoleon. And so we asked the French people, do you support eliminating the republic? Do you support me having a new title? I will now, instead of be president of France, I will be emperor of France. And when put to a plebiscite, yes or no, 97% said yes. So what started as a radical revolution ended with the elimination of a republic and the reestablishment of a strong executive. The reestablishment of an unchecked executive.